Hello, it is Lauren and Pagan from Restore Your Core, and today we are talking about hypertonic pelvic floor. So what is hypertonic pelvic floor? Hypertonic pelvic floor describes when the pelvic floor is in a constant state of grip, tension, squeezing, and the symptoms can actually vary. There are, for example, I'll just list a bunch of symptoms. One of the symptoms is a constant feeling of gripping in the pelvic floor. So some people are aware of it and others are less, but when they're aware of it, it just feels like there's constant pressure or gripping around the pelvic floor or around the anus. And this can be true for both males and females. Other symptoms include, it can affect bowel movements. It can make you feel constipated. It can also make it difficult to fully urinate. So you might urinate and then suddenly have this need to go back and urinate again right after. It can also make it painful to have penetration, sexual penetration. It can make it difficult to keep a tampon inside. It can make it extremely painful to undergo gynecological exams, although that could also be for other reasons, like that's one of them. And it can also make it challenging to have an orgasm, or you can have a lot of pain post-orgasm. It can also lead to low back pain. So there are other symptoms, but those are the main symptoms. Issues around sexuality, around feeling, like achieving orgasm or pain after orgasm, issues with urination, issues with constipation, low back pain, and then this just constant tension and tightness feelings, gripping feeling in the pelvic floor. And again, pushing out a menstrual cup or a tampon, those are very common symptoms as well. So what causes hypertonic pelvic floor? Like, it's hard to know. For each person, it can be really different. Hypertonic pelvic floor can also be very what's called kind of biopsychosocial. It can have a variety of causes that are not necessarily that there's something wrong in your tissues, but maybe from postural patterning, maybe from gripping your abdominals your whole life because you were told that it was better to have a flat belly. It can also come very much hand in hand with sexual trauma, sexual abuse, or feeling a lot of shame, like just a lot of kind of growing up in an environment that was not very open or positive around anything to do with the sexuality or even our genitalia. So that can just cause a lot of kind of gripping and pulling and tensing and tightening. Hypertonic pelvic floor is often also very much related to other issues or other areas in the body. So our breathing patterns can create a hypertonic pelvic floor. Our posture can influence a hypertonic pelvic floor. Tension, restriction, tightness in the body can influence hypertonic pelvic floor. So it would not be fair to say, this is the one thing that causes hypertonic pelvic floor, and this is the one thing you need to do to fix hypertonic pelvic floor. It's a lot more complicated and complex than that. What I can also tell you is that it is a very big logical fallacy to think that all you need to do when your pelvic floor is in a state of very high tension is just relax it. As if the pelvic floor, the ideal state of the pelvic floor, is a released, relaxed state. That's actually not true. The ideal position for the pelvic floor, the ideal state for the pelvic floor, is to be in a ready state, to be in an anticipatory state. So the pelvic floor being overly gripped is not ideal, but also being just like relaxed and released all the time is not realistic. The pelvic floor should be reacting and anticipating. Just like the core, if I go to like lean forward or as if fall forward, my pelvic floor and core would react to that. If I'm lying on my back doing nothing, twiddling my thumbs, my pelvic floor and core would be in reaction to that. It's an anticipatory system, the core and pelvic floor. And when there is a situation like an overgripped pelvic floor, it again doesn't imply that the antidote to that is getting into a state of release. In fact, the antidote to that is getting into a state where your pelvic floor is responding appropriately to your movements, your activities, and your daily life. And that is why it is so important to take into account your breathing patterns, your postural patterns, and your muscle restrictions and mobility restrictions. So I want to cover a few of these areas so you can just do a little bit of a self-test. And if you know you have a hypertonic pelvic floor, you can start to look into these areas as, oh, this is an area that could use some attention. Oh, yes, I noticed I do that when I blah, blah, blah. So just starting to become aware of what you do and your body's patterns so you can begin to resolve that. So let's begin with posture. Why not? Things that can affect a hypertonic pelvic floor are, for example, some people stand with their pelvis very tucked under, and it would flatten out the lower back and kind of pull the glutes under. That can lead to a hypertonic pelvic floor. The opposite, an anterior pelvic tilt, where the pelvis is untucked this way, that can contribute to hypertonic pelvic floor. Standing with your weight shifted forwards on your feet, or even having your always wearing out the outsides of your shoes, or your feet being very pronated, flat feet, that can affect the integrity of the pelvic floor and create a sensation and create gripping. Okay, so those are, and as well as the postural pattern of lifting, that good posture, lifting the ribs up like this, that can also create and contribute to a hypertonic pelvic floor. So just noticing if you have any of those postural patterns happening, that's important. So restrictions, lack of pelvic mobility is a big one. Go ahead and step your feet wide. And then turn, how about your left foot to the kind of, if you're on a yoga mat, but if not, don't worry about it. Just turn your left foot forward. And then your feet, spread them a little bit wider and start to notice if you can move just your pelvis. So it's not moving the spine like this. I'm not side bending in my torso. I'm trying to move my pelvis side to side, mostly though dropping it on the left if my left leg is forward and lifting it. Notice if you feel a lot of restriction and tension in your inner thighs. Super tight inner thighs and restriction there can also contribute to a hypertonic pelvic floor. So working on exercises, even like this one, this is a great one to be doing, can start to ease up those inner thigh muscles. I love to do it also kneeling, right? This one just here kneeling, and you can start to move your pelvis. You can flip your foot off the floor like that and see if your pelvis moves here, and then kneeling and just stretching. This is a great exercise also just to begin to mobilize the pelvis, the inner thighs, and just to get your pelvis a little bit more mobile, your hips more mobile. It's so important. You can bend the knee and move in and out of a side lunge here. Again, fantastic for this entire region. Okay, so those are a few for kind of noticing your pelvis. Now, hamstrings really matter. If you are sitting on the floor and you take your legs out in front of you and you find that you struggle to sit up, right up on your sitting bones, and instead you're sitting back like this, or you need to bend your knees to get your your body straight up, that's a sign that your hamstrings are probably a bit tight, and that tension will pull the pelvis out of alignment and can again create this hypertonicity. One of my favorite exercises for that would be a split leg hip hinge. So you just split your legs in 2 different train tracks as if, and your feet a little bit wide. And you want to place your hands right on your hips. And then you want to come forward over that front knee, over that front leg, bending it slightly. It's a slight bend here. But you're trying not to round your back like this. So you're not letting your back round. Your back leg is straight. You're keeping your spine long, spreading your sits bones, and coming back up. Again, very tight hamstrings, and you'll want to kind of bow like this. So it's good to use a mirror. I have a mirror right over here. So if I was using a mirror, I could get right next to it and watch that my pelvis, again, that the hinging is happening from my hips. My spine is staying long. This one is fantastic for being able to, again, access your hamstrings, spread through the sitting bones, and begin to create more mobility in your pelvis. Another one that you really want to start targeting is the upper body. So mobility in the upper body. One of the exercises that I really love to do, and it's so nice, is coming down into like a kneeling position like this. Let's say my right leg is in that kneeling position. I'm gonna reach my right arm up, and I'm gonna take my left hand down to the floor and look up, opening my chest. So I'm not curling in my spine and opening my chest and then lifting back up. If it's hard to reach the floor, then you want to put a block under your hand. So I'm going to show it to you this way. What you don't want to do here is round your back again. We're not rounding. I'm trying to keep my spine long, and then I'm opening my chest and giving my back a little bit of a back bend, my upper back. Little bit of a back bend, coming back up. That one is excellent for opening the upper body. You might say, Lauren, why would I need to open the upper body, create mobility in the upper body if the focus here is the pelvic floor? Because tension and gripping and tightness in the upper body will create a scenario of excess pressure in the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor responds to that by gripping. Another upper body that I love is simple sideline twisting open. And you're just really twisting open and closing. You can make circles with your arm as you do that, and then closing. So just really getting the upper body to open up is very important. Okay, so we talked about the hips, the pelvis, the hamstrings, the upper body, and finally, you also want to be looking at your internal and external hip rotation. So can you sit easily like this? Maybe not, which is fine. If this is hard, come to sit up on a bunch of pillows, but you also want to check into your rotation. Can you lift your back knee off the floor, right, with ease? And then you don't have to have such a huge range of motion, right? Can you take the back foot off the floor? Now, notice I'm not kind of leaning my body away to be able to do that. So do we have range of motion, right? Are we able to stay mostly upright, maybe slightly lean off? This internal is going to be less movement than this external, but even a move like this is fantastic for your pelvic floor, opening up, again, creating mobility and movement in the pelvic floor so that it's not so gripped and restricted. Again, sit up on a bunch of pillows. Start by leaning off on your arm and doing the best that you can. You can even lean here. And over time, you're working your way to getting back up to sitting here, which might take a long time and never happen, and that's okay too. Okay, so we want to work within the ranges that are available to us rather than trying to kind of contract our bodies into ranges that are not. So it's totally okay to do this here. And the final thing you want to check into is your breathing patterns. Contrary to a lot of like yoga circles and movement circles, we don't want to be doing big, huge belly breathing. And so your ribs are designed for expansion. Your lungs and your diaphragm, the drivers of breathing, are in your rib cage. We really want to be getting a rib expansion breath as we breathe, with just a little bit of that overflow moving into the belly. What I see with a lot of people who come to me, especially with a hypertonic pelvic floor, is they are doing a lot of movement into their belly with breath, but not a lot of movement up into their ribs. So you can do this sitting in a chair, sitting on the floor, sitting however, or lying on the back, and you'll place your hands around one hand around your rib cage, one hand here on your chest, and you'll close your eyes if that's comfortable, and just try to expand and breathe in to your ribs. It might feel really weird and foreign if you're not used to it. What you're not doing is over efforting. See if you can take the effort down. Again, you can do this lying on your back. It's important that the effort is minimal, not even if it's new to you. And you just lie on your back, feeling your ribs expanding with breath. So it is commonly thought, again, that with a hypertonic pelvic floor, that the issue is very much in the pelvic floor and that we have to do something to relax the pelvic floor. And that's not how it works. The pelvic floor will release from its state of hypertonicity and gripping and tension when we create the environment for it to thrive in. When we have a really good breathing to core to pelvic floor relationship, when we are not, when our posture is a little bit more balanced, when we have good mobility through the hips, the pelvis, the spine, and the upper body. It sounds like a lot, but in fact, you can target these areas in 15, 20, 25 minutes a day and really start to work on increasing function in your pelvic floor without spending 3 hours on it a day. But it is a big shift from the paradigm of just relax your pelvis. You know, there's a whole kind of paradigm of lay on your back and spread your legs and lie here and just breathe. That's not really going to take care of the underlying causes of a hypertonic pelvic floor. That might feel really good and might be a valuable exercise, but hypertonic pelvic floor has its roots, so to speak, elsewhere. It's not generally about something in the pelvic floor being a problem. The pelvic floor is where you are feeling the kind of effect of this gripping elsewhere in the body. It's where you're really feeling it in your pelvic floor, but the issues are not necessarily in these tissues, but beyond. And it's an issue of posture, it's an issue of breathing, it's an issue of mobility, and those areas really need to be taken into account when trying to resolve a hypertonic pelvic floor. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope this has been educational for you, and I look forward to any feedback that you might have.